Good afternoon, and welcome to your session on modifications and accommodations for special populations. I know that's a mouthful, but throughout today's session, I hope to equip you with ideas that will make your students with IEP successful in their learning environment. I'm Jennifer Snyder, former family and consumer science teacher at Success Achievement Academy, the alternate learning environment in Craighead County. Many of our students come to us because they weren't able to handle traditional learning. 75% of our students have an IEP, so we have to be on our toes to make sure they are accommodated, not only because it's the law, but because we want these kids to succeed in our classroom and beyond. What is special populations? Our definition states that special populations refers to students who need to overcome barriers that may require special consideration and attention to ensure equal opportunity for success in an educational setting. They must be provided support that will ensure they have equal access to educational resources and opportunities. These students will have an IEP or a 504 and will likely require modifications and/or accommodations in your classroom. Throughout the session, you will be presented with a number of modifications and accommodations that can be implemented in your classroom to help your students learn easier and achieve educational success. If you have questions, comments, or would like to reply to a question I might ask throughout the session, I will share my contact info at the end of this presentation. We are all different, and just because one person learns perfectly one way does not mean that others will learn as well the same way. I remember my first year as a teacher. I'd come from the state office and I had a plethora of resources from the best of the best. I could not have been more equipped to teach my ALE students, except they were in an alternative learning environment because they didn't learn traditionally. So there I was teaching my traditional lesson on different roof pitches in housing and interior design. And I literally looked out to a sea of darkness. My kids and I were not connecting, and I knew I had to change my way of teaching. It was at that moment that I asked my students if they would be interested in building a tiny home. Their eyes lit up and we connected. It was the best feeling. Over the next 3 months, they received hands-on training with an experienced architect. In addition, this project set a path for one of those students who is now graduated and working with that architect, who is not only providing an internship, but also helping him further his education in the field. So let's talk modifications and accommodations. We start with the alternates. Alternate assignments and alternate means of response. I love this picture. People will stop asking you questions if you answer back in interpretive dance. It really does say it all, except my kids wouldn't stop asking me questions, even if I did answer them in interpretive dance. Honestly, they would tend to ask more, and I would get a really good workout in the process. People express themselves differently. Students might not need to answer you in interpretive dance, but they might need to create a slideshow of pictures with very few words. Over the years, I've had students who needed to tell me about a topic instead of writing it down. I had one student for a couple of years. When I first met him, some would think that his brain was a holding room for absolute chaos. He was all over the place, and what he spoke about was typically off topic and totally irrelevant to the conversation. And you could forget having him write anything down on paper. It was almost as if he was at a second grade level. Working with him more and more, it was really easy to discover that he was actually very intelligent. His mind absorbed anything it read. He would spend so much time reading information from the internet, especially something that we might have spoken about in class. His brain simply had a disconnect when he attempted to write it down. Because of this, one of his modifications was alternate means of response. He was able to orally answer any question I asked, and many times would add much more because he went the extra mile to absorb additional information from internet research. So yes, his brain was a holding room for that absolute chaos, but he had it all compartmentalized in nice little file cabinets. One accommodation we can give our students is multiple attempts. When you are in your classroom, I'm sure that you have realized at times that a few of our students just don't care about their grade. Some might not care about a test or an assignment or feel the need to just rush through it so they can get back to what they were doing before. In my classroom, I solved that problem by requiring my students to retake an assignment if they make lower than a 60%. In doing this, my percentage of passing grades on the first attempt went up because most students didn't want to do the assignment over again. This not only helps their overall grade, but it helps them get in the habit of doing it right the first time. So how do we modify time for certain students? For all of our kids, we typically give a deadline for any assignment, whether it be the end of class or the end of the week, or maybe even the end of the semester. When students with modifications and accommodations require extended time, this does not mean they shouldn't still have a deadline for all assignments. They need the deadline, and they should be held accountable for the consequences if they do not meet that deadline. We have to remember that accountability and accommodations are totally different. So a student that doesn't require accommodations and modifications might have a 2-day deadline, whereas a student who does would have 4 days to complete the assignment. There are many reasons why audiobooks and text-to-speech programs were created, but for someone who needs this accommodation to learn, it is quite literally the pathway to understanding. So, what programs do you use in your classroom? There are a few ways that people learn. They learn it by reading it, hearing or seeing it, or doing it. Many of our students don't have high reading levels. In fact, the average for graduating seniors a couple of years ago was an astonishing 5th grade reading level. For SPED students, it isn't uncommon to be lower. Too many words can not only be overwhelming, but very confusing. In my class, students are allowed to use Kami. They can highlight and copy any text, paste it into Kami, and have it read to them. Any book we typically read comes with 3 versions: a handheld book with actual pages they turn, an electronic copy they can read on their computer, either in the classroom or on their own outside of class, and an audio link available anywhere they have internet access. I encourage you to use audiobooks, Kami, or some other text-to-speech program as an alternate means of learning and retaining. I don't know about you guys, but my study guides are usually anywhere from 5 to 15 pages front and back because they cover an entire unit. It might take us 4 weeks to get through a unit because of all the activities embedded within the lesson. It is a lot of work to get through. So how can we help our students with IEPs? I have 3 sets of study guides: an empty one partially filled in, and my teacher copy that is completely filled in. Students who might need to see, or who might see way too many blank spaces on a page, and they might give up before they get started. For this reason, I give them a copy of the study guide that is partially filled in. I always encourage my SPED students to follow along and fill in what they can, and I reiterate that it is okay if they miss something. This helps them stay focused on the lesson for the day. I also allow time at the end of class for them to utilize my teacher copy and write down anything they might have missed. In some instances, students might actually need that teacher copy. If this is the case, you should encourage the students to highlight, underline, or circle key words throughout the lesson and use Post-its or flags to mark specific sections. All right, word banks. Let's talk word walls. I know we typically see these in the lower grade levels, but we play games with ours. I literally take construction paper and I cut them halfway or long way, sorry. And I place the vocabulary word on one and the definition on another. We play a timed match game and they compete in small groups as well as competing against other classes. Of course, we always have prizes anytime we play games like pieces of candy, chips, cute erasers, and water flavor packs. After we are done with our word wall games, the kids are super great to hang them up for me, matching them yet again along the way. These word walls stay up throughout the entire lesson and serve as a visual to all students. They are also color-coded for each course. Personal finance always has green. It's the color of money. Family and Consumer Sciences always has red for our student organization, FCCLA. Color coding their word walls helps each class quickly identify which terms are theirs because there are always times when we might have 4 or 5 different word walls up. As for task breakdown, many students without an IEP might need this. In fact, there are times when we as teachers might need this. For a facts teacher, I would much rather break down tasks when my students are cooking than to have to try something that was made incorrectly. Even recipe cards have breakdowns within the instructions. For example, step 1 would maybe be to gather the proper equipment. Step 2 would be to gather the ingredients for the recipe. Step 3 would be to begin measuring and combining everything properly. And step 4 would be to prepare accordingly. So think of breakdowns kind of like a recipe card. Create those steps for your students. Let them take it one step at a time if they need to. You know, you're going to have a lot of students who might be able to combine several steps together, but there will be some that need to go step by step. Reduction of assignments and lessons. This means that we still give the same assignment to every student. That's called inclusion. But when we allow a different outcome, that's the modification. All of our students will get the same lesson and the same questions over that lesson, but a SPED student will only be required to answer a portion of those questions. This also ties back to alternate means of response, especially when it comes to an open-ended question. When we reduce assignments and lessons for students with IEPs, we enable their brain to work at a pace that allows for optimal learning. They aren't rushed to get through all the reading or all the answers. Instead, they only tackle a portion of the outcome. Changing our routine. It's so easy to get stuck in the same routine, especially this past year. We're tired, we stay busy, but it is important for our kids that we shake it up a little bit every once in a while. I do Fitness Fridays, Tasty Tuesdays, Way Back Wednesdays, and my kids love it. We don't want to sit and have kids do the same thing day in and day out. It doesn't matter if we're covering different material or not. You have to shake things up. You have to change the routine, especially if what you're doing isn't reaching your kids, because it's so easy to just get stuck in that same spot. If I've learned one thing in my teaching career, it is that students love bragging rights, even if it doesn't come with a prize. When you make your classroom fun, your students are more apt to stay on track. They don't just compete against each other on word walls. We have several games that we play in each of my classes. And I'll talk about those specific games a little later in this presentation, but for now, you need to know that students need variation. This includes all students, but especially those with IEPs who might have a harder time staying focused. It helps them do what they need to do now in order to do the fun things later. Daily and weekly objectives should always be visible to students, staff, and administration. If you have a whiteboard, chalkboard, etc., place these objects there. This ensures that every student knows what to expect that day and throughout the week. There are no surprises. In addition, if administration comes in, they can look at your objectives and know exactly what you're teaching that day. Understanding the lesson is key to students retaining what you have taught that day. When we allow about 10 minutes at the end of class to summarize what we learned throughout the lesson, our students will better understand and typically will all be on the same page. So you can do this a few ways. With pop-up answers, where you will allow students to just jump in and discuss, or calling on specific students before asking specific questions, or by color pops. So what are color pops? Color pops are color-coded popsicle props I used in my class. If student got it, then they could hold up one color, and if they didn't get it, they could hold up another. This would either allow me to teach it from a different angle or open the room up for discussion so that a student might learn it a different way. Many times, hearing it from one of their peers can help them learn easier, maybe because of certain lingo, slang, or a scenario they might use. Y'all, I love organization bins. They are probably one of my most favorite accommodations for my students. First, they are super colorful with pens and colored pencils and highlighters and markers and Post-its and rulers and more. Plus, each of them sits right in the middle of the table for 4, and all students have access to it. One thing I learned about IEP students is that many of them are very artistic and creative. If you give them the ability to color code and beautify, they will jump on it. My students respect the organization bins. They return everything at the end of class and make sure it's ready for the next set of kids. During class, students can highlight, color code, tab it with a Post-it, and more. This makes it so much easier to go back and find something on a note guide or project. Okay, so let's look at these learning environments. The top one is a typical traditional classroom with tables and chairs. There is no alternate seating. The teacher's desk is at the front with a chalkboard and TV. My classroom environment is much different than this. I remember the first time administration walked into my classroom for a pop-in observation. We had the lights off with natural light coming in through the wall of my windows, and we were taking notes from the overhead projector. I had students all over the room. Some were sitting in a standard chair at their table, but some were in bean bags, some were on balancing exercise balls, and some were even laying on the floor. But they were all working. They were taking notes and asking questions. My kids were engaged. Later that day, my principal came to me, and honestly, I thought I was going to get in trouble because I had students doing something totally out of the norm. But instead, he thanked me for doing something different because it was working and told me to keep up the good work. From that point on, I was never afraid to step outside of that traditional box. Okay, so how many times have you stood there in front of your class, perfectly executing your speech on the directions for the day? We've all done it, right? Only to have a student go, "What are we supposed to do?" Well, this is a perfect opportunity to ask the students who would like to tell their classmate what we are doing today. 99% of the time, another student will speak up and repeat the directions. Yay, class dojo points for assist others. So our Methodist therapists do Class Dojo for weekly rewards, and we're able to give and take away points for work and behavior. While we tell them directions, we want them to have that visual also. Listing the directions on the overhead projector, whiteboard, or on top of the actual assignment is key to making sure it is visible for them to read it again and again and again. Make sure your students understand the directions by having them repeat them back to you. This might mean going to each table group to ask. You can also utilize those color pops I talked about earlier. Do you understand the instructions I've given you? Green is go and red is no. If there are only a couple of reds, go ahead and let the rest of the students start and address those who don't understand individually. In addition to making sure they understand the directions, make sure they understand how they get that answer. On the internet, all of our kids are smart enough to know that if you ask, you will receive. I can ask Google how to hammer a nail, and it will likely come up with 4.2 million websites and videos on how to do that. Am I right? We want to make sure that they aren't just pulling answers out of the cloud, but are getting to the answer on their own, even if it isn't the correct answer. At least at that point, you can help them understand where they zigged when they should have zagged. When you post discussion questions before you begin the lesson, you open up the possibility of them answering the question immediately and correctly, instead of having to look for it later or recall incomplete or wrong information. Earlier, when I was talking about summarization, I mentioned calling their name before asking a question. We don't want to catch our students off guard. To me, that's almost like a gotcha moment when it can have a negative effect. So calling their name before asking the question allows the student to be alert and focus their attention to you while you ask the question, so you don't have to ask the question a second time. Games. What kids don't like games? They are fun and can break the monotony of the lesson. Do students really care about finances? Give them some Monopoly money and throw those real life bills in there. But don't forget their Air Jordans and all that food they love to eat. Make sure you take that money too. This is one of my favorite clips that I show every year in class.
How do you expect to get into college with grades like this?
No problem.
Huh?
See, I'm not going to college.
Damn right.
I am going to get through high school and then get a job like regular people.
Regular people?
Yeah, who work in the gas station, drive a bus, something like that.
So what you're saying is your mother and I shouldn't care if you get D's because you don't need good grades to be regular people.
Right.
Suppose you graduate from high school. Let's say you just slide by. All right, now you got to find a job. Now, what kind of salary do you expect for a regular person?
$250 a week.
$250 a week?
Yeah.
Sit down. I'm going to give you $300 a week. Yes, indeed. $300 a week, $1,200 a month. All right?
Great, I'll take it.
Yes, you will. And I will take $350 for taxes.
Whoa.
Huh? Yeah. Now, because see, the government comes for the regular people first. Now, how much does that leave you with?
$850.
All right. Now, you've got to have an apartment because you are not going to live here. So, an apartment in Manhattan will run you at least $400 a month.
I'll live in New Jersey.
All right. To live in New Jersey, you've got to have a car.
I ride a motorbike.
You need a helmet. Figure 100 a month for clothes and shoes.
Figure 200. I want to look good.
Okay, so what does that leave you with?
$200. So no problem.
There is a problem. You haven't eaten yet.
I can get by on bologna and cereal. So I got everything I need plus $200 left for the month.
You plan to have a girlfriend?
For sure. Dad, I thought about what you said, and I see your point.
Thank you. Thank you.
But I have a point too.
Make your point.
You're a doctor and mom's a lawyer. And you're both successful in everything, and that's great. But maybe I was born to be a regular person and have a regular life. If you weren't a doctor, I wouldn't love you less because you're my dad. And so instead of acting disappointed because I'm not like you, maybe you can just accept who I am and love me anyway because I'm your son.
Theo, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. When do you get D's and everything? Now you are afraid to try because you're afraid that your brain is going to explode and it's going to ooze out of your ears. Now, I'm telling you, you are going to try as hard as you can. And you're going to do it because I said so. I am your father. I brought you in this world and I'll take you out.
All right. So let's hop back over here. All right. So what games do you play in your classroom? I talked about the word wall and matching games that my kids love to do. And we also play a lot of other games. So I created this slide because when I share this PowerPoint, I want y'all to be able to get back to this. How the market works. It's a stock game that my personal finance do during the semester course. They learn what stocks are, how to trade them, and why they would buy or sell certain stocks. So I hand out prizes and they are awarded at 9 weeks for whoever is in the top position. And then the grand prize is awarded at the end of the semester. Also whoever's at the top position. We also do Build Your Stacks. It's a little fun game that takes 20 minutes to do, and it is 1 year per minute. So it's a 20-year scenario. And students earn income and are encouraged to invest in savings, stocks, commodities, and CDs. And depending on where and when they invest, gives each student a different outcome. So prizes are awarded to the top earner. And in addition, if second and or third place beats the computer, they are also awarded a prize. And prizes are typically snacks like chips, crackers, candy, whatever. We also do Chopped. So that's our cooking competition where students are required to take specific ingredients and turn it into something edible and hopefully good because I have to try everything. The superpowers poster, students choose a vitamin and build a superhero. They draw them on small poster boards, label their superpowers, and everyone in the school votes on them. And then our locker project during our housing and interior design section, my students are given the opportunity to decorate their locker. The teachers vote on best principles and elements of design, best use of color, and best overall design. And then as well as we do a lot of Quizlets and Kahoots. So anyway, those are just some of the games that we are constantly doing in my classroom. And I encourage you to add games to your class, add all those fun things to your classroom for your kids. All right. Do you ever poll your students and ask them what they want to be when they grow up? In my school, the answer is typically a famous rap star. I never discourage my kids from their dreams. I just encourage them to have an alternate plan. But that rap star dream can actually help them out right now. I know when we study the child theorist, it is hard to make that entertainment. It's actually quite boring. But if our students can come up with a rap about them, now we're looking at something fun and they'll remember it. Some of our students might want to do it differently with a poem or story. I had one student who could literally write anything as long as it was based in the water with mermaids. If that was the way that she remembered the lesson, I had no problem with it. All right, so here we switch over to behaviors. We have behavioral issues with many students, but students with IEPs tend to have triggers that are unique. Establishing routines goes back to several things I've already talked about: the daily and weekly objectives, Fitness Fridays, Tasty Tuesdays, and more. If they know what is coming, it's so much easier on them. They don't have to adjust to something new, which can totally send some of our students into orbit. I had a student that could not function if she was led outside of her routine. If it were one of those days where I needed to shake things up and introduce something new, I would let our SPED teacher know so she could begin working on the idea with her before she got to my class. That way, by the time she got there, she was already aware that we were doing something different, and so she was able to accept it much easier. Working with other teachers, especially with the SPED teachers, is the key to the student's success. At Success, we focused on capturing kids' hearts, or CKH. One of the main things we created was social contracts in every area of our school, which included our classrooms. In our ALE, the door was constantly rotating. We had new students coming into our classroom at 2 weeks, 4.5 weeks, 32 days. It didn't matter. School sent over students at any given time, and those students needed to have a visual of what was expected in our classrooms. We built social contracts for each room. Social contracts were built by our students on the type of environment they wanted to learn in: respectful, engaging, quiet, the golden rule, helpful. These were just a few of the adjectives that my students requested. After they came up with their list, I printed it out and all the students signed it. This hung on the wall for all to see. If someone ever went against the contract, either myself or one of my students would point it out, and for the most part, the student would step back and fall in line. Any new students who entered the class was introduced to the social contract, asked if they would like to add anything, and then asked to sign. This held everyone in the room, including myself, accountable to the learning environment set forth. Our kids need the high fives and the pats on the back. When our students feel good about what they're doing, they push to do better because they want more praise. I always keep squishy balls, the squishy stress balls in my class. You know, I've got a bajillion of them from all of the conferences that I've attended over the years. It's so easy to have them in the bin while teaching a lesson. If someone jumps in and gives a correct answer, I can throw a stress ball to them. If someone else adds to the lesson, I can toss another stress ball to them. I do this throughout the lesson. I might have one stress ball out in the class, but I could have as many as 10. I know what you're thinking. Those students are going to throw them at each other across the room. Well, they might. But then they learn quickly that whomever is holding the stress ball at the end of the lesson is the one who gets the piece of candy or gum. If they threw their stress ball at someone else, then they no longer have the ball and are out of luck. It doesn't take but one time, and they hold on to that stress ball until it's time to put them back in the bin and get their piece of candy. I can't begin to tell you how important it is to have a working relationship with a student's parents. And you guys know this. You have to establish this early on. The parents need to feel comfortable with you. You don't only contact the parent when the student does something wrong. You contact that parent when the student does something right. It's impossible to call every parent for every little thing, but I can definitely shoot them a text while I'm in the middle of a lesson. It's quick and easy and will mean more to that parent and student than you will know. In addition, make sure you talk to the other teachers. The student might not be doing great in your class, but might be doing awesome in theirs. Find out what they're doing differently. How are they getting them to engage? Why is that student making it in their class? Because of your efforts to stay in touch with their parents and other teachers, these students will know that you are investing in them. They will try their best to stay on target with work and behavior, especially when you know that you will text their mama at a drop of a hat. When it comes to progress report, I text my SPED parents a weekly grade just so they are in the loop. I also give an update to the SPED teacher of any SPED student that has a D or an F. My students who are not on an IEP or a 504 plan, they receive their progress reports halfway through the 9 weeks. All students, as well as their parents, can access Google Classroom, see what assignments they are missing, their grades for each assignment, and their cumulative grade. Increasing wait time for individuals is not something that can be done overnight. Many students have literally no impulse control. I had a student who would just randomly exclaim, "I have a cat," in the middle of my lesson. And it wasn't just in my room. She did this in every class. There was no filter, and she didn't see it as interrupting. So I, along with her other teachers, worked with her every single day on waiting and raising her hand before speaking. It took an entire semester, but we could see less and less interrupting and more patience. It was really satisfying to see that transformation. So when she came back to school the following semester, the old habit of interrupting had completely ceased. Now, switching gears totally, I remember attending a conference and our speaker talked about brain breaks. She said that our brain was only equipped to paying attention for about 20 minutes at a time. At that point, it begins to wander and shut down. It needed water and blood circulation. Check and check. When we think about physical exercise, we think, well, that's what they do in PE or at recess. Well, physical exercise is something we should encourage our students to do. I have posters in my room showing examples of yoga, wall squats, and planking. Or maybe we just go for a walk outside on the track. For facts, we are able to incorporate physical activity across our frameworks easily. But what if you teach another subject? How do you incorporate it then? If you teach math, could you have students create human triangles or octagons? Or maybe walk or run meters outside? Maybe you would see how far you had jumped from a standing position as opposed to a running start. What if you teach history? Why not touch on the history of Olympics maybe? Create your own Olympics with some of the first games. Science, there are so many possibilities here with the law of gravity, energy, motion, and cause and effect. I partnered with our science teacher one year. I told her we were going outside to fly kites. And of course, she threw some scientific law in there and wanted to join us. So I said, okay. And both classes went outside and flew kites, learning a little something different from each realm of curriculum. There's a way for every subject to incorporate physical activity, but you've got to find your way. That concludes this session on modifications and accommodations in special populations. I hope you were able to take away at least one new thing that you feel comfortable implementing in your classroom. I thank you so much for attending this session. If you have any questions or comments, I'm providing my contact information. You can call, text, or email, and I will get back with you as soon as I'm able. Thank you guys so much, and I appreciate your time.